So I'm Adrian McKenzie. Thanks for coming along to listen to me today. And wow, what a day it's been. Part of what I'm going to talk about, I feel like it's going to be building on quite a number of the speakers that have already you've heard today. So I'd like to thank the organizers for such a diverse group of speakers. I know it's challenging to find all of that diversity out there to speak in a conference, and you've done a fantastic job. So today, just quickly, I'm going to cover a lot of ground, so I won't go too deeply. I'm going to start off by talking about belonging and why it is important to us, especially in the workplace. And what does courage look like? And how do we bring our authentic self to work? And how can we take more risks that will lead to diversity? And when we have diversity, what role does safety play? And especially when there's conflict. And then I'm going to wrap up by talking some more thoughts around selecting organizations to work with. So I'm going to start with two questions for you. And so first one is, where do you most strongly feel you belong? And the second question is, can you remember a time where you didn't fit in? I was really keen to sign up for this presentation today, mostly because I wanted to get that vibe of being live in front of an audience and feeling what it is to be with you. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But the next best thing is that you can give me some of that energy through the chat. So if you're able, if anyone feels safe to put answers to those questions in the chat, I'd love to see what and hear what you're thinking about. So for me, there are not that many places that I strongly, truly believe that I belong. I can tell you, I wasn't particularly looking forward to the networking event because I find it really stressful walking into a room of strangers and introducing myself. But I was going to do it anyway. There are a few groups that I do feel like I belong with. The first one is I play a card game, Magic the Gathering, and there's a group in Southampton near where I live that I feel like I connect with. I attend my local church, and there's part of that group that I feel that I belong. And also when I'm having lunch with my extended family back in Australia, which hasn't happened for a couple of years for obvious reasons, I feel like I belong there. So who is Adrian? So once again, thanks for joining me. My current role is Director of Software Engineering at Cirium, and I've been with that team for about 8 years in a variety of different forms. And what that means is that I've been around long enough to be held accountable for the successes and the failures of that team. So I can't pass the buck for my screw-ups onto anyone else. I've always been in technology. Initially, I started as a programmer, and then I was a support manager, a project manager, a development practice manager, a scrum master, and now a director of software engineering. I love it. I love working with technical people to deliver to our customers, and I love being part of a team that performs and succeeds. And my motivation for getting out of bed in the morning is workplace culture. My passion is to try and enable a workplace culture where people can truly enjoy themselves and find it rewarding. If you just listen to Daniel in the previous presentation, he talked about joy in working with code. And that is my motivation, is creating joyful workplaces, whether it's in the code, but also around the code. Over the years, some of the most uncomfortable and painful times for me have been when people that I work with have not found that joy. And it happens all too frequently. So now my teams work in a great industry, and they work on great products and with some awesome technology and practices, many of which we've seen throughout the day today. But that's not my focus. Today, I'm thinking about workplace culture and how people fit in or they don't. And I'm speaking from experience, and I do have some experience. I don't know if you can see the gray hairs there. This topic, inclusion, has been on my mind a lot, and clearly, given the other speakers, is also on their mind. And I wanted to explore it more deeply. And I hope what I share today will help you find and develop a workplace that you can bring your authentic self to. So back to belonging. I'm not sure, because there's a bit of a lag, I haven't been able to see some of the answers to those questions, but I hope they're in there. Let me just click on the comments. All right. Why did I start with belonging? In my experience, all of us are seeking to belong, to find our people. Last night, by chance, I rewatched on Netflix the show Must Go On with Adam Lambert and Queen. And Adam and his mother are talking about his early childhood experiences where he tried lots of different activities, football and other sports, but he found his people when he was on the stage. And that is, I thought it was a really powerful a really powerful example of how we are all seeking that where we belong. I feel it's like part of what it makes us human. I have a teenage daughter, and much of her journey through high school has been about discovering who she is and who her people are. And it can be rough and difficult. As an adult, at the age of 37, about 9 years ago, I moved countries to this country. And the first years of my experience here were about finding where I belonged, finding my people in a new country. Given that we spend about a third of our time at work trying to be creative, productive, and efficient, finding a place where you belong at work is just as important. Belonging is important, very important. So I'd like to tell you a story. We've heard some powerful stories today, and maybe this will pique your interest. Earlier this year, I interviewed a young man, let's call him Joel. Given we were all working remotely, this was a video interview. He was sitting in a room, I think it was probably his bedroom at his parents' house. And after the initial pleasantries, he starts off by telling me he has Asperger's. And he explains what that means to him. And briefly, it's about sometimes it can be difficult for him to communicate with others effectively. I had not had any prior experience in working with people with Asperger's, but I rolled on through the interview, adapting my style and trying my best to get to the bottom of the answer, is Joel appropriate for my team? After the interview concluded, I rolled my chair back and exhaled, wondering, what should I do with all of that? The easy option would have been to throw the resume in the pile of the other no's and move on. However, there was something that really piqued my interest about Joel. So I contacted my occupational health professional. It's one of the perks of working in such a large company is there's someone who specializes in everything. And she provided me with some resources for successfully interviewing people with Asperger's. I did a bit of reading, I took a deep breath, and I decided to throw myself back into the process and try a second round interview with Joel. I'm so glad that I did. In our second interviews, we do a little programming problem, we do a whiteboard extension, a code review, and the usual question and answers. Technically speaking, Joel was off the charts. We were so impressed with his answers and his examples. However, I was still very concerned. Our workplace culture is highly collaborative. We rely extensively on interpersonal interactions and verbal communication. Of all of his strengths, these key skills were not what Joel possessed. After much introspection and reflection, I thought we'd roll the dice and give it a go. If we could harness his intellect and technical skills, I'm sure he would lift our product capability to new heights. I was very nervous about the impact on others in the team and the overall culture, but I built plans to try and compensate for that. For me, this story is about courage, about being authentic and taking risks. Joel showed much courage in talking about his authentic self very early in our relationship, and we both took risks in this transaction. So what does this story about Joel tell us? I mean, there's many things that you could take away, but one key point is diversity. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts. What does workplace diversity mean for you? Maybe you could put some more comments in the chat. We'd appreciate that. Clearly, from my perspective, Joel is different from the prevailing culture within our team. And I think this is a story about embracing diversity. But why would you do such a thing? I think it's clear why diversity is a good thing. However, in researching my diversity, I was overwhelmed by the amount of information. One of my go-to websites, Harvard Business Review, HBR, has an extensive collection of peer-reviewed research articles on the benefits of diversity in the workplace. The analogy that resonates with me is if you imagine a plantation, a pine plantation of trees. I'm sure you may have walked through one. They're kind of eerie, quiet. They have a dank smell. When you look on the ground, all there is pine needles, nothing else. However, when you work through an old growth forest, there are trees and species everywhere. It's busy, it's chaotic, it's almost overwhelming. That plantation is a monoculture. There is no diversity. It's very susceptible to certain types of risks, like a disease will take out all of the trees. Whereas the old growth forest, with all of its species, is so much more resilient. And the same is true with diverse groups of people, diverse workplaces. They are so much more resilient and creative. But at what cost? What happens when you put people who are not like each other into close proximity? What do you get? Conflict, friction. Is your workplace ready to cope with such conflict and friction? Or is that too unpleasant, too stressful? It's so much easier to be monocultured, isn't it? To feel comfortable with my tribe, my people. What a conundrum. One way through this, in my experience, is safety, psychological safety. If people feel safe in their workplace, safe with each other, knowing they can be their authentic selves, they can build empathy with one another. So that when there is inevitable conflict and friction, they can face into it. They can hold it between them and work through it to a better outcome. Without safety, people will either bury their authentic self deep down behind the mask, or they might leave, or they generate too much conflict, attacking and being destructive. None of this is conducive to a creative, productive, efficient workplace. So some questions for you to ponder. How safe do you feel to be authentic? How safe is your workplace? How diverse is your workplace? How do you handle conflict and friction? Do you implode, explode, or work through it? I'm going to share. So this is one of our internal websites that we have at LexisNexis, where we have our diversity, equity, and inclusion groups. They're called employee research groups. And in our organization, this is one of the ways in which we handle growing that safe space and bringing people together into the tribes that they belong to so that they can bring their best to work. Is this something that you could start at your organization? As you can see from this list, there's a myriad of ERGs running within LexisNexis, and there are more starting all of the time. You can see there's an autism ERG, a learning disability ERG, an African ancestry network, working parents. So there is groups for many different people. So this is just one example of people connecting and belonging within an organization and supporting the diversity required that allows a sense of belonging and being authentic. Many organizations are like LexisNexis. They publish this sort of information publicly. When you are seeking an organization to join, do your research on the company. Find a place where you might be able to belong. In my experience of interviewing candidates, their primary focus is on technology alignment, skill alignment, and industry alignment. Very few people I speak with seek workplace cultural alignment. Speaking of which, let's just quickly have a look at the team that are here today with us in the booth. Feel free to join them. As I wrap up, I want to say this is the team of people that work with me as a hiring manager to help us select candidates to join our organization. My tip, come prepared to an interview with questions that will help you explore the culture of the organization and whether you might belong there. Not just technically, not just from your skills or your industry, but also cultural. There are as many organizational cultures as there are organizations. Your challenge is to find the one that you want to be in. As I wrap up today, let's revisit Joel. So he started with my team earlier this year, and as I mentioned, we put in place some tools and processes to maximize his chance of connecting and belonging. For example, on the first day, when a new employee joins the team, we always take them out for lunch to the pub next to our office. We pay for the lunch, of course. This social experience is about us saying to the new joiner, you are one of us now. This is where you belong. Welcome. Obviously, it's been a bit more difficult with remote working, but we try and do this as soon as we can when they join. And the first few weeks and months have gone really well. And the key to this is, in fact, Joel himself. Obviously, as a manager, I don't go around telling other staff about special needs of people without permission. I had not briefed the team that he had Asperger's. It was in the second sprint where the team were doing a retrospective where he spoke up and let them know. Once again, he showed courage to show his authentic self to his peers. After that retrospective, many of the team called me up and said, Adrian, did you know that Joel had Asperger's? He told us today in the retrospective. It all makes sense to me now. I know why you put him in this team with me. I know why you told us to focus on these tools and practices. I know what I need to do in order to help him be more effective at work. All of this constructive behavior and supportive behavior flowed from the courage to be authentic and to take a risk in a safe environment. There will be conflict. There will be friction. The collaboration will be more challenging. But with a bit of empathy, it is my expectation that this diversity will bring great benefits, not just to the business, but to the individuals as well. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adrian. And that talk really resonated with me, actually. My younger brother is 15. He has Asperger's and he wants nothing more than to be a software engineer when he grows up. So I think it's fantastic to see, people talking so openly about this and how to be, inclusive in organisations. Absolutely stellar work. We've had loads of amazing questions come in. So I guess let's start with, a soft one to kind of work our way into them. So I guess, people are asking, how do you, as a company at LexisNexis Risk Solutions Group, how do you celebrate diversity of people and ideas?
Wow. Where do we start? So we have, as I showed in that image, we have many groups that are working together around all of these special interests. And we have a support network that publicizes things like, special months for, Disability Awareness Month, et cetera. And those comms go out across the whole organization. I think there's about 9,000 of us in total. And there are organized events for us to attend, and there's lots and lots of training. We have a lot of resources to equip employees and managers to work in these sorts of contexts. So in an organization of our size, we have a lot of support to train and educate and support employees and managers in working with the diversity of people that we have in our workplace today.
Amazing. And then I think that leads quite nicely on, because actually we've had somebody ask, how do I get my company, my leadership team on board with diversity and inclusion initiatives? Do you have any advice?
Well, I mean, that is the challenging thing. I always say when I'm looking for a job, you're actually interviewing your manager. It's not the manager interviewing you, right? So you need to find people that you're prepared to connect with and to be able to, again, as I was saying before, a safe space to have difficult conversations. And if that difficult conversation is with your manager to say, I'm not sure that we have as diverse a workplace as we could have, if you can't have that conversation, maybe you're not working for the right person or in the right organization. But as I said before, I think all of these things first start with courage. You as the individual have to put yourself out there in a vulnerable place to be able to ask these questions and challenge the people that you're working with. And if that leads to a place that is not pleasant for you, then maybe that's not the right place to be. And if it does respond, that is, you can be the change that the organization is looking for. So it's courage, and you can get burnt, because that's what happens when you're being courageous. But hopefully you have that support network around you, whether it's inside of work or outside of work, to deal with those rough bumps along the way.
Absolutely. I think I always say to people, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because some parts of it are uncomfortable and it is hard, and you don't always know the right thing to say, and you don't always feel like you have the right knowledge or nuance. And it is just really important to be brave and courageous, like you say, and just be able to have conversations, because we're not going to make positive change unless we start talking about things, right? No, I love that. What a brilliant answer.
Really true. And I would say one of the questions, if you ever happen to be interviewed with me, I'll give you a tip, because I always ask this question, which is, tell me about a time when you dealt with conflict within your workplace. Like, as I said in my talk, there is conflict and friction in the world. There is at home, there is with your friends, there is in workplace. And how you as a person manage conflict and friction productively is a really important skill in life, as it is in work. And so having that courage to enter that conflict and use it productively to go through it is a skill to develop. And the first time that you do it, you probably won't do it well. But if you're in a supportive environment, you can keep practicing. And I asked that question in the interview because I know that my engineers have conflict every day, but it doesn't blow up and it doesn't lead to people being upset or leaving the organization. It actually leads to better outcomes within the organization.
Absolutely. And we've actually had a question, as a manager, how do you foster that kind of open environment where, your team members can communicate effectively without, like you say, without leaving the organization, without things blowing up out of proportion? Like, how do you do that as a manager?
Yeah, I do it in multiple different ways. So as a manager, I have one-to-one conversations with people, which is where I can coach them in a safe space, where we will say, I remember that interaction, we could try that again differently. So it's about coaching and feedback in a timely fashion with people in a private, safe space. And then when you have that conversation privately or individually with different people, you can then have that conversation as a team. And so I can say in front of the team, hey, remember, we talked about this, and let's have a different go at it in the moment. So I think that's one of the things I always say to my team, because I'm relatively well known for delegating things, is I will back you. If you muck this up, if you screw it up, it doesn't matter what you do, I will back you 100%, so that they have the confidence that I will be there to support them no matter what. And then that gives people the courage to go off and do what needs to be done. So my tips are one-to-one feedback in private, feedback to the team in the moment, and backing them knowing that you are backed 100%, your staff are backed 100%, no matter what.
Absolutely. I mean, that is literally how you get people to feel braver, right? To have that courage to kind of feel like they can trust in you and their organisation and where they are. Absolutely. We've also had a question. Somebody's asked, you know, do you think there are blockers to being more inclusive in tech?
Well, there are blockers, and I think it comes down to there's a lot to know. There's a lot to learn in life. There's a lot to learn. You go to university or high school or whatever, college, and you're learning about how to program, and you're learning about these other things. There's so many skills to learn, and one of them are things like unconscious biases and interpersonal relationships and giving feedback. There's a myriad of different skills to learn in order to become an effective employee in a team of people in an organization. So I think you need to be able to work out what you need support from coaches and mentors and counselors and leaders, managers, to work out what your blind spots are in order to develop those skills.
Absolutely. And we've had a question from somebody who's kind of asking, you know, what are some creative ways to proactively reach out to, you know, software engineers and devs from those kind of underrepresented communities? Like, what is your advice there?
Well, I mean, that is a really tricky thing. And Jordan, who's I think in the chat there, is my talent acquisition recruiter, and he's the one that does a lot of work with me on trying to find that. There are lots of different, like hackajob, there are lots of different places where organizations that help bring in more diverse resumes. I think that one of the things as hiring managers is that we need to demand, before we make decisions about who to hire, that we have been given the opportunity to see a diverse number of candidates. If I'm only ever seeing candidates of a certain age or a certain demographic or certain things, I'm only ever going to pick them. But if I demand that I'm not going to make a decision until I see a broad range of people, then at least I have a chance to make a more diverse selection. So I think as the hiring manager, it's our responsibility to work, if you're doing it directly or with your recruiters, to say, give me more candidates. I can't make a decision yet.
Absolutely, definitely. I think it is so important, isn't it? Because then you give so many more people a chance, and you get to meet so many more interesting, brilliant people who would be such a great fit for your organisation. Absolutely. Exactly. And as Jordan's just said in the comments, a diverse interview panel as well is also a fantastic way to achieve this. Definitely.
Absolutely.
What advice would you give to businesses trying to create a better sense of belonging in the workplace?
Better sense of belonging. Well, I think that's it. Like I said, I think there are many different organizations, and they should all have different cultures, right? And I think that diversity is healthy across the world. And the trick is to know what your culture is, to be intentional about it. So we do a lot of work around what our values are, what our behaviors are, and we recruit and we reward and we celebrate those sorts of things. So once you understand who you are, who your tribe is, who your organization is, then you can try and work to attract people to fit in with that. And it's right that not all companies should be the same, because not all people are the same. People have different needs. Some people want to be face-to-face, and some people want to be remote. Some people want to be in an up-tempo, fast-paced, stressful work environment, and some people want to be in a relaxed one. So I think it's about knowing who you are, articulating who you are, and then, as I said, for candidates to research that and find, yes, that's my people. So I think it's about voicing who the organization is, so that you can find the people that need to be in that organization.
Absolutely. And I think the final question for you today, Adrian, somebody has asked about your personal experience about when you moved to the UK. They've said, you know, what about it made it difficult? And then how did you kind of find that sense of belonging and your tribe?
Yeah, well, it's difficult in some ways. Moving from Australia to the UK, you'd think it's not that different in the sense, because we speak the same language, and there are many similarities. But what's really difficult when you move to countries like that. It's the really small things, the things that everybody knows that's grown up in the country that is subtly different. Like how to work the NHS, and GPs and schools, and like my daughter's now in year 10. I have no idea what's an A level or an O level or GCSE. It's stressful. All of the things that everybody knows that you don't know because it was different is stressful, especially because they assume that it's mostly the same. So trying to work through all of that, and the language, using the word pants instead of trousers, you always get flip-flops instead of thongs. Like it's confusing. You're all over the place with some of the language. So you eventually work it out. What's really stressful is now I go back to Australia and I can no longer remember which word to use in which context. I've just completely confused everyone. And what's the second part of your question? I lost.
How did you find your tribe and your sense of belonging?
So, I mean, for me, like I said, you have passions, you have interests. You've got to put yourself out. As I am a little bit sort of borderline introverted. And you've just got to have the courage to put yourself out there. I just looked up on the internet and so there's a group of people that play Magic, and just turn up and say, here I am. And if they welcome me, I come back, and if they don't welcome me, they don't. So it's that similar sort of thing of having the courage to put yourself out there, and just try different things to meet people, because they're looking for you as well. That's the thing. Everybody wants to belong, and they want people to belong with. And when you turn up and they're like, yes, you're a person that I can belong with, you're welcome. So